now we're really excited. One of the things that we know that a lot of our school districts are facing and going through as we talk about working with students and student athletes during this pandemic is kind of the social emotional well-being of our students. That has transitioned into being focused on the social and emotional well-being of our wrestlers during these trying times, and how difficult some of this stress and anxiety can be for them. I'm a huge believer that most coaches are type A personality people. They have a strong belief that if you take variable A, the student athlete, and variable B, the plan of work that you're going to put together during the course of a season, that 90+% of the time you'll see result C occur. And we like to see our dominoes all nice and aligned and straight in a row. And what we have found is during this pandemic, those variables have all kind of left, and it leaves a lot of coaches bewildered, frustrated, and worried for athletes that they've spent a great deal of time with, but also frustrated because it's something outside of our control. We had the opportunity to reach out to the NWCA to talk about the well-being of our coaches, the mental well-being, and how important it is for our coaches to take care of themselves during this time, and why it's important in a lot of different areas. I'm very excited to be able to introduce Dr. Earl Walker. Dr. Walker holds a doctorate in counseling psychology, specializing in sports and exercise physiology, and is also a National Strength and Conditioning Association certified personal trainer. He's taught sports psychology, the sociology of sport, exercise physiology, health education, and fitness at Mount Ida College in Newton, Massachusetts. He's also been an assistant wrestling coach at Boston University for 6 years, coaching several NCAA tournament qualifiers. He was head coach at Delaware State. He also himself was a high school national champion, an NCAA Division I All-American, and is in the Boston University Wrestling Hall of Fame. And I'm excited about Dr. Walker's message and what he brings to us to consider as coaches, to take care of ourselves and to take care of those members of our staff as well. Dr. Walker, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. This is a joy to be a part of my original and community, the wrestling community. So hopefully I can be of some service and support to you during an incredibly difficult time, this pandemic. But first of all, I want to thank you guys for inviting me here, specifically Nate and Doug for the invite to this event, and also Mike Moyer and the NWCA for facilitating our connection. Very thankful for them. And again, just listening to Mark's message and the effort and commitment that he has to at least giving us the best chance of having a wrestling season is just incredible to me. All the work that all the coaches are doing to make this happen for our athletes and for the wrestling community in general is just incredibly impressive to me. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and hopefully I can be of some assistance and support during this journey and through this journey. If it's okay with you guys, I don't get a lot of opportunities during my 9 to 5 to discuss and talk wrestling. So if you don't mind, I'd love to just start out with a wrestling story and talk about one of my favorite wrestlers and some of the characteristics that he embodies or embodied because he has now passed, unfortunately. But some of the characteristics that he embodied, I'm also hearing, and I've known this, but it's just reinforcing to hear your commitment and dedication to making this season happen. You embody some of those same characteristics. And I just want to highlight and emphasize the importance of that in what you do in modeling healthy and resilient behaviors for the student athletes that you work with. So I want to talk a little bit about David Schultz. And most of you know, probably all of you are familiar with his accolades and achievements. 1984 Olympic gold medalist. He won that at the age of 25 years old at the LA Olympics. I'm not going to go through his list of achievements because it would take too long, but I really want to focus on one particular aspect of David Schultz's career, and that's the longevity. And I want you to think about what it really took for him to be so successful for such an extended period of time. So, for example, as a high school senior in 1977, he was one of the best wrestlers in the world, not just the United States, but in the world. For example, he placed, I believe, second place in what was believed, and I think still is believed to be the world's most difficult wrestling tournament, Tbilisi, as a high school senior. That was in 1977. In 1995, almost 20 years later, and just before his death, he was still one of the top wrestlers in the world. He was the reigning national senior freestyle champion. And that's incredible to me. And I want to focus on that period and that longevity and what made Dave Schultz so different, what made him so unique. So again, just to reiterate that, from 1977 to 1995, he was one of the best wrestlers in the world. And at several periods during that time frame, he was the best, right? So he won the Olympic gold won a world championship in 1983, Olympic gold in 84. So how was he able to do that? And I have to admit, I don't know Dave. I didn't know Dave personally. I had an opportunity to observe him and be in his presence. We both wrestled for Foxcatcher. I was a high school kid wrestling on their youth team. And you guys know the Foxcatcher story and his involvement as a competitor and as a coach for that team. So I saw him, he was around, he was present. But for me, what personalized his story to me is because he was a middleweight. He wrestled in my weight class. He wrestled in the weight class that I saw myself competing in and hopefully making a national and Olympic team. But at his age, I felt like he wouldn't be someone I would have to consider ever competing against. And probably, to my great fortune, I never did compete against him. But as I got older, as I was in college, moved into college, became an All-American, and he was still competing, I started paying more attention to him. So I happened to have the fortune or misfortune of wrestling Pat Smith, the first four-time NCAA champion. I wrestled him in the semifinals of the NCAA tournament in 1994. And this is what drew my attention to Schultz because he was still competing. So I'm starting to think, okay, how's this weight class at 163 flushing out? And what are my opportunities for maybe being able to make a world team, make a national team, make an Olympic team? So you start really paying close attention to the folks that are still competing. And Dave was hanging on, but yet Pat Smith was kind of the heir apparent. It was believed at least that Dave Schultz was past his prime. And Pat Smith, first time, four-timer, again, he's the heir apparent. For me, again, it was personal because I'm thinking, okay, do I have a realistic shot at this? Well, I just lost to Pat Smith in the semifinals of the NCAA tournament by 2 or 3 points, 5-3, 5-2, something like that. So I thought, okay, he's definitely better than me. I had no delusions about that, but it was a gap that could be closed potentially. So I'm in the running. I'm excited that one of my favorite wrestlers, Kenny Mundy, had retired. He had won an Olympic gold medal in '92. He had retired, kind of clearing out clearing the way for a new wave, a new era. So everyone was really kind of watching to see if Pat Smith would really be that next guy. And I'm paying close attention as well, because he was kind of my barometer, my way of measuring where I stood in that. So having said that, I want to talk about Dave Schultz and what he did to remain competitive and ultimately beat Pat Smith in the senior nationals in 1995 and be the national champion. David Schultz was a different kind of guy. He embodied some characteristics, as I said, that many of you embody, that just allowed him to stay competitive and perform at a very high level for many, 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 many years. So as it was told to me, Dave Schultz studied the rules, and every year, as you guys know that follow international freestyle wrestling, they changed them all the time. They had just made an interesting change in the rules internationally that allowed the bottom man in parterre position in freestyle to now be able to score. Before, if you escaped, there really wasn't much incentive to escape because they didn't award you any points. But now they changed the rules to allow you to score. If you escaped or reversed, they gave you a point. I think it was a reversal gave you a point. So as I understand it, Dave studied the rules and the rule changes each and every year and adopted his strategy and his wrestling style to give him the best opportunity for a successful outcome given those rules. I want to say that one more time. He studied the rules every year and the changes every year to adapt his style and his strategy to give himself the best chance of performing at an incredibly high level. So with that rule change, his strategy was, yeah, this Pat Smith kid's got an incredible low single, he's fast and slick on his feet, but if I can neutralize him on his feet and get to that bottom parterre position and use that to my advantage and score from there, then I've got an advantage. So I'm told that his goal was to win the match 1-0, to beat Pat Smith 1-0. Interestingly enough, I actually watched and reviewed that match today, and he beat Pat Smith 3-1. And most of his points were scored from that bottom position. And you could see him playing out that strategy. What made Dave Schultz so different? How did he remain so competitive for so long? Why are we still talking about him today? And why am I bringing him up? Why am I discussing him today? 3 characteristics I want us to focus on. His adaptability to the environment. He didn't complain like many of us US wrestlers around that time about how unfair it was that the rules kept changing in freestyle and how they were catering to a more European style of wrestling rather than playing to the strengths of the American style, right? He just simply studied them, learned them, adapted to them, and said, okay, this is how I need to wrestle now. This is going to be my strategy. So his adaptability to the environment was very unique. His flexibility in his thinking. He did not say, this is how you should wrestle. This is what wrestling is like. This is what wrestling should be. This is how I'm going to wrestle. That was not a part of his conceptualization. He was very flexible in what he thought wrestling could be. He didn't think about what it should be. He thought about what it could be based on the current existing rules. That was 2. The third thing that made him very unique was his ability to challenge commonly held beliefs. Again, those ideas of what wrestling should look like, how we should wrestle, the style, the strategies, what should be acceptable, wasn't a problem for him. He simply adapted his style and strategy to the current existing rules, to the environment, right? So his adaptability to the environment, his flexibility in thinking, and his ability to challenge commonly held beliefs. These are characteristics, as I listened to Mark describe all the efforts that not only he, the Kansas Wrestling Coaches Association, but also all of you coaches are embodying and demonstrating, and to make this season quite possibly happen, right? Quite possibly happen. So it's incredible for me to listen to that commitment and those same characteristics being demonstrated by you guys. Now, having said that, this pandemic has given us an opportunity to challenge and modify some of our beliefs and expectations and norms, right? What should the wrestling season look like? What should it be? How should we train, right? It's forcing us to think outside of the box. It's forcing us to be creative. It's creating a lot of stress. It's a lot of responsibility. Some of that stress can even be greater if we hold on to some old beliefs, right? Like if our expectation is to have a season like last year or the year before, pre-pandemic, right? This is forcing us to think out of the box. In my field of psychology, we talk about these characteristics as being resilience, right? Being resilient. So how can we build resilience? How can we sustain our resilience during this pandemic? Because it's a lot. We're all getting tired. I'm hearing the term COVID fatigue. We're all feeling it, right? It's impacting us in one way, shape, or form. And because you guys give so much, coaches are givers. I don't know that there's anyone on this call today, on this meeting today, that's doing this for the money, right? I can probably see virtually some chuckles to yourselves. So we're givers naturally, right? So I want to give you some things to focus on. I'm going to challenge and encourage you. And some of you are already doing this. Most of you are already doing this. So forgive me for going over this. But I want to give us some challenges, some encouragement, and also some specific strategies. Because Dave Schultz was flexible in how he conceptualized wrestling, and he was able to adapt his style and his strategy accordingly, according to the rules, according to the existing rules, according to any changes, right? And that's what you guys are doing. And how do we continue to do that while combating this COVID or so-called COVID fatigue, right? The responsibility of trying to do the best for our student athletes. So I'm going to give you three things, and then I want to leave you with some very specific strategies. And then if you would, really think about some very specific questions for me, because I want to make the most out of this opportunity, and think about some questions that you may have for me. And if I can offer some suggestions, I certainly want to do that. So here's three things I want to challenge and encourage you to do or continue doing. Be flexible in how you view your role as a coach, right? We have an idea of what a coach should be, right? But I want you to start thinking about what that role could be. So be flexible in how you view your role as a coach. Two, I want you to be flexible. I want to challenge you and encourage you to be flexible in how you conceptualize your training and your season. All right. So we're going to have to train differently, right? We're going to have to prepare differently. What we thought of as a season is no longer. We're going to have to think of it differently. An example of that I learned from the state of Massachusetts has shifted their entire season to April. They're going to start in April. I scratched my head. I said, wrestling, high school wrestling in April. How the heck are you going to do that, right? But we got to think outside the box. This is happening all over the country. Right? This is what we're being forced to do, but I want us to embrace it. The third thing I want to challenge and encourage you to do or continue doing is be flexible in how you define your wins and your athletes' wins. So we always hear about shifting our focus from outcomes to more process-oriented thoughts, right? Now is the time to really solidify that thinking. So really thinking about wins as not simply the outcome of a match, but right now, man, you guys have already had multiple wins by even helping not only your fellow coaches, but also your athletes maintain some hope that there will be a wrestling season. That's a win. Let's count that. Not only count it, let's verbalize that, right? So quickly, I want to challenge and encourage you to be flexible in how you view your role as a coach. Be flexible in how you conceptualize your training and your season, and be flexible in how you define your wins and your athletes' wins, right? Okay. Now I want to get into a little more detail and give you some specific strategies on how to do that. I want to give you 6 specific things. First one is, I want you to prioritize and attend to yourself. Be more selfish. I ordinarily wouldn't give that advice to other groups, but I know that the risk of sharing that advice with you is different because you're givers. So I know you won't take that to an extreme, but I want to encourage you to prioritize and tend to yourself, your needs. Tune into yourselves, because caring for yourself allows you to take better care of others, those athletes, your families, et cetera, right? So I want you to really pay close attention to your experiences, how you're dealing with these circumstances, right? That's critical. You're a critical cog in this wheel to make the possibility of a season happen. We need you to be healthy. So you got to take care of yourself, right? Now, 2, I want you to acknowledge your emotions. What does that mean? Again, attending to yourself. The way you feel is the way you feel, right? I'm tired. Man, I'm disappointed. Um, I'm exhausted. I'm just sad. This is just ridiculous. This is overwhelming. I want you to acknowledge those emotions that you're experiencing. There are no good or bad emotions. There are no good or bad emotions. I want you to acknowledge them and own that, right? I'm going to tell you what to do with those in a second as well. 3, I want you to acknowledge your thoughts. Those thoughts that this sucks, this stinks. When will this ever end? I want you to acknowledge them. Again, that's a part of attending to yourself, tuning into yourself, and starts us on that path of making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, right? Acknowledge your thoughts. With those thoughts, I want you to write them down. I'm going to share what we can do with those in a moment. Write them down. We think of thoughts as being positive or negative. I want to eliminate that thought process and think of them as being facilitative or debilitative. Are they helping you achieve your goals, or are they preventing you? Or are they doing nothing? Okay. So I want you to label them. I want you to write them down. I want you to label them. You put a little F for facilitative by it if it's going to help you resolve a situation and move you toward your goal. I want you to put a D for debilitative by it if it's no use. Nonetheless, if it's a thought, it's still a thought. Okay. And again, I'm going to share with you what to do with that list of thoughts and those emotions, right? 4th thing I want you to do, this is about community. We got to lean on each other. You're a part of my community. This is a community that can't get rid of me, and I'm thankful for that, right? The wrestling community. I want you to reconceptualize even how you think of community, because oftentimes as competitors, as coaches, we view each other as a competitor, rivals, and things like that. But your community includes family, friends, colleagues, coaches, and your athletes. And of that community, guess who understands more than anybody what you're experiencing and going through? Your fellow coaches, your fellow colleagues, those of you who are teachers and coaches who are juggling both those responsibilities, right? And your athletes, right? So I want you to share your thoughts and emotions with your community. Now, you might think, well, I can't share that with my athletes. I want us to eliminate that thought process, right? There are some things that we don't want to share with our athletes, but we want to lean on our coaches for that. So, for example, that list that you developed, those emotions that you've identified and acknowledged, okay? We're going to model some healthy behaviors by sharing those with our coaches and colleagues, as well as our athletes, right? So what do you share? What do you share? Well, you're going to share more details with your coaches, your colleagues, obviously family and friends, right? They're part of your community. They're our supports. But with your athletes, I want you to model healthy, resilient behaviors, resilient building behaviors by simply saying, yeah, this stinks, or yeah, I'm tired. However, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about contingency plans in a moment as well. But this is what I'm going to do. It's really important because it validates the feelings of your athletes and your fellow coaches when you say, man, I'm tired. This is getting exhausting. What I want to caution you about is dwelling on it, right? I want you to acknowledge it and follow that up with what you're going to do to get through this, right? So we're going to model a process of resiliency. Yeah, it stinks. Yeah, this isn't ideal. Man, I'm tired. This is what we're going to do, right? With those thoughts that you labeled, facilitative and debilitative, I want you to cross out the debilitative ones. And we're going to share the facilitative thoughts with your athletes. That's what you want them to hear. Man, I'm tired. But man, we still got a season. We still got a shot. We still got a shot at a state championship. You want to demonstrate, you want to model that. But there's no shame in your game for acknowledging that these are tough and difficult times. It's validating to your athletes And it's helpful as well and validating to your colleagues, your fellow coaches, right? To think of it that way. Again, I challenge you to reconceptualize your crosstown rivals or things like that, because they're going through it as well. We can support each other in spite of that. One thing about Dave Schultz is once he left the mat, you were just wrestlers, you were just human beings. So he would help you with technique, he would share technique with his rivals. This is why so many people and countries embraced him. He's one of the very few American wrestlers that could go to Russia and get a louder applause than the actual Russians themselves, right? So these are things that build your resilience, your ability to adapt, and just simply reconceptualize. These are times where we reconceptualize where our rivals are and acknowledge them as a part of our larger support community, right? 5. Or is this 6? I'm sorry. This is 5. Yes. I want you to redefine what you think of as the preseason, the season, the postseason, and off season, right? You're already doing some of these things. The preseason was different. It had to be. So you made some changes. The season is going to be different. We don't even know what it's going to look like, right? But we're going to be open for the possibility. This thing will linger. Our postseasons will change. Our off seasons will change and have changed. So I want you to think about, what did our seasons, our preseasons, off seasons, our trainings look like pre-pandemic? What could they be now? What are the possibilities? When did the season start or end pre-pandemic? When could it start or end now? Again, what are the possibilities? Notice I didn't say when could they be, or when should they be now, or when should it start or end? I said when could. We're going to eliminate that word should, because we're not going to should on ourselves, right? That's that guarantee that I believe Mark may have mentioned earlier, that we may get into that habit of, if we take X wrestler and apply hard work, Y, it will lead to Z outcome, right? We got to be flexible. There's too many variabilities, too many variables, too much chaos that we have to account for. We're not going to do that. So we're going to develop contingency plans. We're going to develop contingency plans. That's the 6th thing I want you to focus on. And share them with your athletes and fellow coaches so they can see how that you want to, again, model the process, your thought process, your actions. You want them to see that we're planning for when things don't go the way we hope that they go, not the way they should. Again, we eliminate the should, okay? So we're going to share them with athletes and our fellow coaches, because we may be able to gain or give ideas from each other, even folks who were once our crosstown rivals, right? So that's the if-then. If this happens, then we're going to do this. That's your contingency plan. But I want you to make it stronger. I don't like if-thens. I prefer when this occurs, then I'll do this, right? Because if we get lucky enough that it doesn't happen, that's great. I love luck. I'm okay with that, okay? But I want us to be well prepared and demonstrate that strength, that we have a plan in place. So when this happens, this is what we're going to do, right? And again, we share those plans, those contingency plans. We keep our athletes in the loop. So again, we're modeling that thought process of resilience, okay? When you can't expect or guarantee an outcome or how things are going to play out, you want to demonstrate that we can still make this work one way, somehow. Okay, we're going to get something out of this process, even though we cannot predict or guarantee the outcome. The last thing, I know I said 6, but this is 7. I want to remind us to redefine our wins. We talked about that earlier, what we consider a win for ourselves and our athletes. And I want you to count your wins, the processes that it takes to get there. You already have many of them. The fact that we're having this conversation about a season. Last April, when they canceled the NCAA tournament, I thought to myself, wow, you can't have wrestling until this thing's cleaned up, right? I mean, there it is. And the fact that we're talking about how to do it is a win. Let's count that. Pat yourselves on the back for that. Give yourself some credit for that and share it with your athletes. Share it with your fellow coaches. That's important to reinforce and encourage them to keep going, right? So we're building that resiliency in how to manage and get through difficult times like this pandemic. It's like Dave Schultz, right? We're just going to take the existing environment, the current rules, and we're going to make it work no matter what. We're just going to adapt, adjust. I'm incredibly impressed by this work that you're already doing, right? I want to encourage you to continue doing that and do more of it. Lastly, and just in summary and in conclusion, I just want to share, take care of yourselves. In doing so, you'll model healthy and resilient behaviors. You're givers. I know it's hard. Prioritize yourselves. You'll do better by taking care of yourselves. You'll do better by your athletes, by your families, right? Prioritize yourself. Be flexible in your thinking and adapt your strategies and approach to make the most out of these very uncertain and chaotic times, right? This will build some resilience that will benefit you and your athletes far beyond this pandemic, right? And lastly, lean on your community for support. Remember, let's redefine who our community is. Those rivals, man, we're going through this together. Those schools we compete against, we're going through this together. You are your brother's keeper. You are your brother's keeper. Once again, thank you so much for having me, everyone. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them, send them through on the chat. And again, if you wish to reach out to me, Earl Walker at mindovermatterperformance.com. I'm always available and love working with the wrestling community. Thank you.
Wow, Dr. Walker, thank you. I've got 3 pages of notes just from 30 minutes of your presentation. So, and I love the Dave Schultz story to start the whole thing off, because what a great ambassador he was. And
Incredible.
to take a look at that in
Incredible.
comparison is definitely a great example of resiliency in,
Yes.
in an athlete. Coaches, an opportunity real quick. If you've got some questions, we've got just a little bit more time. If you've got some, feel free to ask. I know sometimes maybe coaches are a little nervous. This kind of gets into some of the touchy-feely part of being a coach. And I think Dr. Walker shared with us about leaning on each other. And I know several of you have already done that either for me or with me so far as we face challenges. Coach, Coach Walker, I'm gonna tell you, I was sitting here, we're on a 2-week moratorium right now. This is typically we'd be back to working with our athletes this week, right after Christmas. And in Kansas, it's not till January 4th. And so literally I've got a file that I rebuild every year, the things that we cover and things that we do. And I'm looking at what we didn't really get to do because we did go into quarantine like others for about 10 days. And then I'm looking at what's to come, and our schedule's been modified. And I'm literally looking through this document going, oh my gosh, I don't know what to cover.
Right.
And I think you kind of hit something on the head, to be quite honest, when I have to redefine that what happens from here to February doesn't look like any other here to February.
Right. Yep, absolutely. That's that flexibility that we talked about, redefining what we view as the wrestling season, how we prepare. This is an opportunity, and who knows, after the pandemic, maybe we'll figure out a better way to do things anyway, right? We don't know that, but in this moment, it's just really important to be careful holding ourselves to the same expectations that we did a year ago or 2 years ago or pre-pandemic. That's too much pressure. It may be unrealistic. The key thing is your presence and your willingness to simply make an attempt to give this a go is remarkable. And what that models for our kids, that hope that it's providing, is also incredible. Just really quickly, one of the most incredible stories I heard from a wrestler to a younger group of wrestlers was Chris Bono. He's one of my favorite all time because he did this. He stood up in front of a group of kids at a summer camp, and he didn't talk about all the matches he had won and all the medals he had won. And he had a lot that he could talk and brag about, right? What he talked about was this one guy that he just couldn't seem to beat, and how depressing it was, and what he was going to do to try to beat him, to go back after it. And what he did was validate it for those kids. He modeled for them that it was okay to have self-doubts. They really connected with that. They understood that. And that's what I'm suggesting for our coaches. We don't have to be that gold medalist that overcomes everything, et cetera, and everything's so good. Dave Schultz himself had a very difficult time towards the end of his career. He couldn't beat Kenny Monday. When Kenny retired, he was right there waiting. He was the number one guy again. Unfortunately, when Dave passed, Kenny came out of retirement and resumed his spot as the number one guy, right? But those are just examples of why it's important to be relatable. We don't have to be perfect, so our ability to connect with our athletes is also about simply being human, right? And sometimes we have to lower our expectations and just be honest with ourselves. And that demonstration to them can be so powerful, so powerful.
Coach, is there anything you would share? God forbid, we're in a situation where we get into our postseason series, and now we've got a wrestler who has advanced to a certain point in the tournament, and COVID has an impact on that kid. Whether he gets COVID or whether he gets put into quarantine, either one looks to be season ending for that kid. Any advice for us as coaches? Because I think many times we hurt as bad for that kid as the kid hurts because
Yes.
of our relationship with them. Any
Yes.
advice you have for us as caregivers to that kid?
Right. Yeah. So, and that's that contingency plan that I talked about, right? And again, let's make it a strong contingency plan. When that happens, what will we do? How will we support that kid? How will we be able to identify a win, even in those circumstances, not only for that kid, but for yourself? What would be a win for you? Well, one would be doing the right thing to protect the kid as well as those around him, right? Even though it's a difficult decision, right? So that's a win. Number two, plan now. How are you going to support that kid? You know your athletes better than anyone as individuals. So what are the buttons? What are the things that are meaningful to that kid? And how can you model that it's not just about winning that state title or even finishing the season, because that might not even be a possibility. So let's start now. When these things occur, when that kid contracts COVID, when he has to be pulled out of the tournament, no matter what part of the season, what steps are we going to take as a coach, as a team, and guess what, as a wrestling community? And guess what you can do together for that single kid? What if it's not just about what you do? What if all the coaches in that region, in that division, at that specific tournament have a plan to support that kid, understanding how devastating that might be? And you support each other, support the coach who's going through it, right? Let's talk about those things now. So when this kid contracts COVID, how will we support him and identify wins for him as well as the coach, as well as yourself? What is the responsible thing for you to do? What are some things that will make you feel proud? And let's decide that now. Let's decide that contingency plan now. And guess what? Write it down and share it with each other. When these things happen, this is how we're going to help these young kids through it. And this is how I'm going to help my fellow coaches understand that in spite of making a very difficult decision, they did some right things and you're incredibly proud of them, right? So that's that contingency plan that I talk about. When this happens, this is how we're going to handle it.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Coach and Dr. Walker, thank you. You are a coach, you're a wrestling coach, and I can just tell that by your very nature. But definitely your advanced degree deserves that respect as well. And I a lot of times hold that word coach as in high regard as I do many other titles. But Dr. Walker,
that's higher than the doctor. That's higher than the doctor.
But thank you for coaching us tonight and giving us something to think about. And I truly hope that we see NWCA pick this up, because your message is something that coaches across the nation need to be hearing right now. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything I can do, as I said, Earl Walker at mindovermatterperformance.com. please feel free to send any questions that you may have after this event.
Great, great. And
Thanks
I
for
will
having me, Doug.
follow up. And thank you. And thank you to the coaches that have joined us during their Christmas break. And again, for the coaches that are online, please share with your fellow coaches. A tremendous amount of information and something that I think we all can benefit from. So for all of you, I'll wish you a happy new year, a happy and safe new year. And I look forward to seeing us all back on the mat January 4th.